Okay, good. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Joseph Rossell. I work for the City of Phoenix in the Community and Economic Development Department. And the title of my presentation today is Economic Disruption of Phoenix Farms, Evaluating Responses to COVID-19. So before I begin, I just want to take a quick moment and tell the fellows that you all have been probably the most talented group of individuals that I've had the good fortune of working with in my professional career. And I say that not to flatter you, but to simply say that I've been humbled by this experience. And I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the PQRS documents over the past several weeks, looked at your presentations, listened to those presentations, and in some cases did that multiple times. And there were so many ideas that I think that I could adapt and incorporate into my own body of work to have greater impact. So I want to say thank you for that. And I'm super excited to see how your projects develop and progress, and hope to stay in touch to see, the level of impact they have on our community. So second thing, I just want to briefly give some context, right? So thinking about how my project evolved over the past several months, and then the situation that's unfolding right now changed that, and it made it evolve in a way like many of your projects. So I just want to give you some background into my thinking and how this influences my current project. And then a second piece of that is this project really stems from 3 of 5 goals that identified that were adopted in the City of Phoenix Food Action Plan. And so namely the goal to strengthen the local food economy, celebrate its local and diverse agriculture, and the goal to help support the growth of a resilient food system. So if we think about my outline for the day, I want to get into some of that background and again, just help you understand my type of thinking, and then I'll get into the problem. There's been some great work that's been done on local food systems in Maricopa County going back to the fall of 2015 with the Maricopa County Food System Coalition. And for those who know the organization, we'll just refer to it as MARCO to save time. Well, MARCO actually hired a consultant named Ken Meter. He's one of the preeminent food system analysts in the country. He's done a ton of regional food assessments for states, counties, and cities. And he helped us gain a better sense and understanding for the food system in terms of its strengths, its weaknesses, opportunities, and of course those vulnerabilities that I will go into. And so the ones that I'll highlight that he mentioned, and I see that I'm not citing him, I'll get that before I say the presentation, is land use. Now, I don't love this map, but it at least illustrates the problem that if you look at the county, there's existing today within zoning plans and different ordinances that have been put in place across the valley, there's a lot of ag land available for growers to utilize or farmers to utilize. As you project out into the future, and if you look, oh, I'm sorry, this is going forward. If you look into the central core and the most urbanized area, those options for growers are going away. Right? And that's one of the vulnerabilities that these farmers are facing. Displacement is another vulnerability. And to give you just 2 quick stories, on the left-hand side, David Vos works for, he actually founded a farm out in the West Valley called Blue Sky Organic Farms. He was a chef that had this dream of becoming a farmer, and he's done that, and is relatively successful. But the issue that he's facing is that he leases land from an adjacent dairy that has sold that to Fulton Homes, which they're going to put more single-family residential development on the site. So he's actively looking for more land. On the right-hand side, we have Frank Martin. He's been around the food system for a long time. He's a champion of local food production and consumption. He has various farms throughout the city of Phoenix, and his farm on 27th Avenue in Lower Buckeye, he's being forced to leave. So another example of displacement. And the issue that he's facing is that he wants to continue farming within the city of Phoenix. But as we explored in that prior slide, that the opportunity for land for farmers to utilize is becoming more scarce, and prices are going up as a result of that scarcity. And then what I've learned in talking to these farmers is that not all sites are created equal. They need to have a certain soil profile. They would like them to not have been remediated, and there needs to be a certain type of water available. Otherwise, it's not viable. So again, another vulnerability. Another vulnerability is that the average age of farmer is increasing. They're aging, and unfortunately, at the moment, there is not a succession plan in place to get the next generation of farmers. Whether you repackage farming and call it agri-tech, or come join us in building a more sustainable, resilient food system, the state hasn't put together a plan to actually do that. This slide, obvious, by 2100, farmers, even by the middle of the century, will have to contend with increased heat. And then this one with water challenges, this is such a complex issue, and I don't know enough about it other than I know that farmers, at the top of their mind, they're thinking about the drought contingency plan, water rationing, and how that is ultimately going to affect their ability to grow food in the future. I mean, you can teach an entire course on this, and I think ASU does because it's so complex, but it's a vulnerability they're facing. And forgive this cheesy slide. I wanted something to encompass other vulnerabilities. And in a report, Community Food Networks, that was created by this food systems analyst, Ken Meter, he identified an additional vulnerability that was surprising. One of them is that these farmers feel isolated. And that was surprising to me because you would think that these farmers would likely have a sense of camaraderie and community, but they've actually, through his findings, he showed that there's a general distrust among farmers. And then there's also a general lack of support for local food, despite paying lip service to it, right? Buy local, shop local, do local, all these things. People are not purchasing local food as much. So that gets me into my problem statement, and I'll read this quickly. Prior to COVID-19, City of Phoenix farms exhibited varying dimensions of vulnerability, and we've discussed that in the prior slides. And that threatened their long-term economic viability and overall health of the local food system. And so as the effects of this pandemic rippled across society and the economy, an already fragile local farming community endured a new financial disruption as shelter-in-place orders, restaurant closures, and shuttered schools impacted segments of their customer base. I don't know why the slides are going forward, so I'll have to go back, resulting in lost revenue. And over the course of several months, I chatted with farmers, distributors, nonprofits. I've picked the brains of people who have been involved in the food system far longer than I, certain professors who have helped me, and even involved in this fellowship have sharpened my thinking. And some of the questions that we're asking in relation to COVID are, how are these Phoenix farms responding to the loss of sales channels due to COVID-19, right? And the sub question to that would be, to what extent do farms of various type and scale differ in those responses? And here we're interested in knowing, all right, is there some sort of inbuilt mechanism of resilience that small farms have that mid-sized farms or large-sized farms don't possess? Or what about, for example, if they're organic, are they more resilient in their responses? Were they able to quickly pivot when those sales channels dried up as a result of COVID-19, more so than conventional farms, or vice versa? You know, we don't know. And so the next question, this you would think has an obvious answer, but you know, we don't have the data on it. But how do pre-COVID-19 sales to local consumers compare to the sales that are going on now during the pandemic, categorized by market? And what I mean by that is, right, if you look at the same time frame from last year, these farms were selling to restaurants, they were selling to hotels, they were selling to schools. That dried up. So in order to stay afloat, they had to creatively pivot in a way to tap into a new market and diversify how they sold their food that was grown. And I'd be interested in finding that out. I view that as an indicator of increased interest in local food consumption, right? And so the last part of the questions that we're asking that help influence this project are, how does the current disruptive event influence how these farms of all sizes, different types, prepare for future shocks, right? Like, are they, there it goes again, are they thinking about preparing for future shocks in a different way than they were before the event, right? And so that goes into what capacity exists for these farms to partner with one another and maybe get over that general distrust we talked about earlier, that vulnerability, and connect to other stakeholders that are working in the food system, and even decision makers who don't really understand local food, on some sort of local farms community resilience toolkit. And the research, this is where I could obviously use help as someone who hasn't done this before. You know, I keep, like I said, I keep going through what you guys have done and trying to learn. And I've been given some feedback, but we will interview and survey Phoenix farms. We've identified roughly about 29 distinct farming entities within the city of Phoenix alone. If time and resources permit, I would like to expand and get a greater sample size and look at farms across the greater Phoenix metro, including farms in Pinal County and obviously Maricopa County. And so we're looking to understand how those responses to this shock vary and how the demand for local food pre-COVID-19 differs from today, right? We asked that before, and whether the capacity again exists for these farms to work with others on developing a resilience toolkit. And going through the process of lit reviews to see what other regions around the country, around the world, have put together these resilience toolkits. Never done this IRB process, so that's a new experience for me, going through that now. And then I was able to secure an intern in our department, and then other staff who are working on local food systems will help conduct surveys and interviews over the course of summer and the fall. Right, so that brings me to the deliverables, and this has changed over time, I imagine, like a lot of you. And in the first one, right, journal article, a lot of the academic researchers have this because that's your world. And as a community practitioner, I kind of shied away from this. So I'd like to give a shout out to Erica Hodges in her presentation. She said that, oh, you know what, I'm going to do a journal article. I've never done it before. It's a completely novel experience. And I think by her as another community practitioner wanting to go down that path, this instilled in me this level of confidence to want to pursue the same thing. And I know that's kind of a funny thing to hear, right? Especially with the academics who do this all the time, it's no big deal. But for us, we don't get the chance to do it very often. So I want to view that as a personal challenge to take that up. This second deliverable, this should have an asterisk, and this is tentative. And the deliverable would not necessarily be the development of a local farms community resilience toolkit for the fellowship, but the deliverable would be more geared towards how do we get there, right? So if we find that farmers are beginning to think differently about how they prepare for these future shocks that they don't even, whether there's some they anticipate or some they can't even forecast, do they have an interest in overcoming that distrust? And are they willing to partner to create this toolkit? And if so, then I would partner with perhaps individuals from ASU or other individuals focused on food system work on a grant that we could develop this thing in a really sophisticated, compelling way that people actually use and launch it over the course of 1 to 2 years. The third part, so I was fascinated with Michael's presentation last week on data visualization. It's completely and fundamentally reshaped the way that I think about presentations. I haven't done that on this one, right? This is still the typical formula for what we do at City Hall. But Michael, with the work that you're doing, like I said, it influenced me in a number of ways, and I'd love to connect separately with you. But what I would like to do is all of the vulnerabilities and the stories that farmers are facing, right, and the work that we've done and their responses to COVID-19 and creatively pivoting and finding new markets, which people have said they needed to do for a long time, and the interest in overcoming the distrust and perhaps putting together this toolkit to really be resilient, right, and to continue to grow food despite all these different scenarios in the future. I'd like to put that together for City Council. And I don't know, I don't have all the tools yet on how to effectively do data storytelling, but it's something that we'll have our intern and others from the city and you do, because I don't want their eyes to glaze over if I give a presentation. City council members, they're brutal. They'll end up texting if you lose their attention, and I want to hold it, right? I want to tell a compelling story about what's been done, what these farms are doing, why farms are important, why local food production is important, and why sustainable food consumption is also important. And that goes into the next bullet point here. In economic development, we do an incredible job of, incredible job of doing these marketing campaigns on social media, right? We'll talk. Everything okay? Oh, that was Melanie talking.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. So we do this great job of doing these social media marketing campaigns where, if we want to talk to tech companies in San Francisco, we say, come to downtown Phoenix, specifically come to the warehouse district. We have great office space. It's super cool. It's open. We got bike share, we got light rail, we got all these great restaurants. It's the place to live and to work. And we do this with advanced manufacturing companies in the Southwest Employment Corridor, telling them you have access to key resources and infrastructure you need to grow your business. And we do this in other employment corridors for office projects. Historically, in economic development, we've ignored the importance of food, and part of my goal is to change the conversation and to get individuals to start taking food seriously. And this is where it begins, is getting the word out that finally an economic development department doesn't view farmland as just something to rezone for more housing or more industrial projects, but we actually take it seriously, and we want these businesses, we want to view them as an integral part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and that they grow their business and they thrive. And then, so what, right? By understanding how these different types of farms, going back to all sizes, all types, respond to this situation, and coupled with the development of a toolkit that we talked about, the Phoenix farming community can enhance its capacity to prepare for a host of future challenges. And it's some of the ones that we talked about, right? Like, how do you continue to grow food in an era that's dry, where there's water rationing, where there's not a workforce as much as there was, where they're aging, all these different scenarios, and even some they can't anticipate, right? Like, how do you continue to grow food after an alien invasion or a zombie or robot AI apocalypse? And I'm joking here, but the toolkit will help them begin to prepare for a number of scenarios, even if they're unknown, right? So they could continue to grow their food despite whatever scenario is unfolding. And so the last piece of this integrates with the Phoenix Food Action Plan. We outlined those goals earlier in the presentation. And as a byproduct of this whole fellowship and all these amazing conversations and feedback that I've had in our department, I created a new strategy, and that's the Food System Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Transformation Strategy. And this helps us with a subsystem of that transformation, and we're focused just on farms. And so the quick idea behind that is that we will encourage the growth of small businesses, entrepreneurs, and innovators at every step along the food supply chain, in hopes of ultimately transforming it to become more sustainable and resilient. And I've just got approval to do this, so it's kind of a cool thing. And lastly, the acknowledgements. Patricia, thank you for your leadership. I know it's been tough to try to put together something compelling, especially during doing this virtually, but I love it. It's been an incredible experience. All the Kerr Fellows for what I said earlier. Special thanks to Dao Ching Tong within the cohort. She's sharpened my thinking around these. We were hoping to do a grant. It didn't work out, but I think there's opportunity in the future. Roseanne Albright, she has become my mentor in food systems. She's responsible for the Food Action Plan. She helped found Marco, just a great person. And I'm fortunate to learn from her, the folks in my department. And then Cindy Gentry, for people who know food system and know Cindy, she's been around for a long time. So I made it a point to schedule time to chat with her and to download her massive knowledge on food systems, where it needs to go. And she works for Maricopa County Sun Produce Co-op. They've experienced an uptick in sales over last year. And she helped found the downtown Phoenix Farmers Market. So that's it. I could take any questions, and just really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Joseph. We have had some quite a bit of chatter in the chat session over here. Some of it was due to your fabulous microphone. So we are now going to do a podcast. Unbeknownst to you, these plans for a podcast have now been laid in place thanks to your wonderful new microphone. So let's start up, from the top. Anybody want to go ahead and start and jump in? If you want to leave your comment in the chat and have Joseph look at it afterwards, that's also fine, but jump right in if you want to actually get some feedback live right now.
I'll go ahead and start. Mine is kind of a comment, but I'm open to your thoughts too. Joseph, as a citizen of the, I'll just read what I wrote. As a citizen of the middle of Phoenix, sometimes I forget that we even have farmland in some sections, and especially the fringes of the valley. And your topic brought to mind a lot of articles I've been reading about the difficulties faced by no pun intended, the legs of the meat production industry, but I don't know much about food growers' production difficulties. And I was wondering if their stories are parallel, where they talk about slows in the market and inability to move their product, backing up their workflow and things like that.
Yeah. So great question. We haven't talked to all farmers. Our outreach was set to begin in the middle of March, and then as a city policy, we actually can't interact with anybody unless it's virtual until June 1st, and they're going to reevaluate it. But the conversations that I have had, especially with someone who sources food from the farms, is that it's been a tough go, right? If they haven't pivoted to doing community-supported agricultural subscriptions, then they're not selling as much food anymore. They're having trouble finding labor. We had a conversation with, I think it's called Dan Sizen Dairy. You've probably seen their milk products around the grocery stores. It's actually pretty good if you like milk. If you don't, I'm sorry to gross you out. But they were dumping milk, right? Like, so the meat industry had issues. The dairy was forced to dump, I mean, tons and tons of volume, to the point where it was just an impact on their bottom line. And then of course the issue of food waste. So so great point. We also need to do a better job. And this is why I think Local First does a great job on highlighting farms. Marco does a great job. Others do an incredible job. It's just that the people, for example, who some of the channels that we have, they're not familiar with what farms are doing. And to be honest with you, I get this question in economic development in my department a lot. They're like, why are you even focused on farms? Like, this makes no sense. Like, don't focus on farms, only focus on tech companies. And I say, well, we can do both. We can do all of that.
Great.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Joseph, this is Ed Williams. I was a fellow last year working on food systems as well. And I'd love to have a conversation with you at some point. I'm working on some innovations in food production, and with my team this year, actually right now, my partner is being interviewed by News 12, I think it is, about the food desert innovation food desert elimination program that we're trying to create. And we're kind of looking at a completely different way to create local food systems and use it to kind of eliminate food deserts and kind of create a lot of resilience in the system as well. So it's kind of complicated. I don't want to go jump into it here, but I'd love to chat with you offline about it.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And I think that one of the opportunities that would arise from our conversation is that we could highlight you again through, I mean, we do this all day for cool tech companies. We do it with advanced manufacturers, but to bring in people who are thinking about innovating the way food systems exist today, that's the story that we want to tell. So I would love to have a conversation offline with you.
Definitely. Thank you.